Welcome to our sixth slot, Lost in Translation, where with this interesting session, we would like to initiate a further discussion on one of the hot topics, making science and collection and exhibition more visible to the public. We will focus on the questions, how can we break down the barriers between research, science, collections and exhibition? Or should we do so at all? Do we have to translate to the public, or should we let the visitors experience the real thing? Is there an alienation effect through the translation of a curator, or do we scare off visitors when we confront them with the complexity of research? To get to the bottom of this, with short and powerful statements, including barriers, challenges and chances, we have three speakers in petto who could not be more suitable for this. And I'm very happy to introduce them now for all of you. Catherine Oualian. Catherine is with us. Yeah, hi, Catherine. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Catherine Oualian is a trainer at the Ecole de la Mediation in Paris, which is a professional training space for explainers led by Universions. The Explainers Training School's main goal is to bring awareness on the science explainer's professional situation, the skills required, and the training need for these professionals. We are very glad that you're here and be a part of our speaker round here, Catherine.
Thanks.
And last, also participating, and I'm a little bit proud to introduce Michael John Gorman. Michael is the founding director of BIOTOPIA, a major new museum for life sciences and environment planned in Munich. He previously founded the Science Gallery in Dublin, a space for creative collisions between science and art, now developed as a global network in cities including London, Melbourne, Rotterdam, Venice, Bangalore, Atlanta, and Detroit. And recently, he also published a book, Idea Colliders, which I have here in my hands. I'm very proud. A nice topic, a nice title, Idea Colliders, the Future of Science Museums.
Hi there.
And last but not least, yeah, hi, Michael. And last but not least, and my very dear colleague, and you already had the chance to meet him, Uwe Moldrzyk. But I need to say again, Uwe is the head of exhibition and knowledge transfer and the science program of public engagement with science. It's always fascinating from my point of view what he brings up compared, yeah, we will see. I'm very happy that you're part as a speaker here in our round as well. And I'm quite sure we have here a very exciting and fascinating trio in here. And I'm Vivien Strohmann, and I'm the coordinator of the experimental field of participation and science here in our museum, and I'm the moderator for this slot. And speaking of, I bet you're already very excited about our short statements of our speakers, and therefore, I would now hand over the floor to the first one. Uwe, why don't you start?
I can do that, but you had a question for me. That I of course can ask myself, and that is, how can we bring collection-based research into the museum? We will look at different perspectives on opening up, I guess. I would like to share my screen, and I also want to give my following speakers the possibility to push the barrier between a statement or a short presentation and a very short introductional statement. I guess I'm pushing that. So here we go. I hope this works. And I hope I'm able to start the presentation. Okay, and you should see a white screen now. Is that correct? Fine. Okay, I tried to rush through it. So in Berlin, we differ between collection-based research and question-driven research at the museum, which would be worth a complete discussion. So I won't dig into that, but I have to make that point to probably explain things later. We all know that museums undertake studies on the collected objects and exhibit or communicate those objects and the results to their studies. That's more or less the core of a definition of museum. And if it's so, the question is, it should be a fact that collection-based research is in any museum, right? So the question is rather, is it also in the exhibition? Because that doesn't mean the same thing. I probably won't even dig too deep into that as well, and start from how do we do our projects. So the first question I have is not how we do it. The first question I have always is, why are we doing that anyways? Is there a reason for the project in question? The next question is, what are the goals? What are the aims we want to, what do we want to reach with it? What are the key messages? For whom are we doing it? And probably what are premises? And if I can answer these questions, I have a team that can explain me how to do it. If we don't answer these questions before, anything we do will be random. I'm not saying it can't be a success or it won't be nice to look at, but if we don't have a structure, all of you who's dealing with exhibition knows that. You start a project, you get the title, the topic, you do your first brainstorming, and from then on, it's all the time decision to exclude things and include things. You know, it's always, if we do this, we can't do this. And how are our decisions based if I don't have a matrix that allows me to see what a certain thing is for, and how we can get along. So having said that, we have some sort of history on trying to open up the museum for several reasons. I won't answer this because it takes too long, but there are reasons why it has been important to the Berlin Museum to be more visible with what we do and what we have behind the scenes. It has been extremely important, and it belonged to a bigger strategy than just an exhibition strategy. So one of the first, I mean, really important projects was the rebuilding of one of the last war ruins in Berlin, which became one of the most modern vet collections worldwide. And before the collections, also the vet collections were spread all over the museum. And we could do behind the scenes tours on open day or open night of the museum and so on and so on. We feared to lose that with the new building because there were security restrictions in there. And we managed to basically by a trick for the fire department in Berlin, what you see here are two different halls. There is one hall that has a glass wall, which contains our parts of our vet collection, and you have a second hall that coincidentally goes around the first one, and there is where the visitors are allowed. And it is what it is. It's just, you look at it, this is the vet collection. And one of my favorite quotes on this is when people say like, oh, the installation of it is so lovely. And I'm like, okay, look at it. There's even just regular neon light in there. It's just a collection. The beauty comes from the number of objects and the objects themselves, which is a nice thing. Next thing that we did was that we tried to get the research into the exhibitions as well. And here we have a little project where we got an interesting object, a no-brainer for natural history museums, an original T-Rex skeleton on loan, I think, not for rent, but we got it for free if we present it and undertake research on it. And we started to bring in the questions our scientists have towards the object, which was a new for us. And we also had what you can see here, if you can see my cursor, there are semi-transparent screens. And there we had also the scientists on it. And there was a selection, 5 or 6 main topics. And each scientist looked different. And what the most quoted thing, or the reaction a lot of visitors had was like, "Oh, this is how a scientist look. Actually, this one looks like my mom, and this like my sister. This is actually not how it seems obvious to us, but probably there's a need to communicate about it." Next thing is that we said, well, no, we want the real deal, and we want to get walk-by encounters between visitors and scientists in exhibitions, which of course is some challenge when you have to do the scheduling and you can't have it all the time. But it's a nice thing to do. And that leads us to to my last point, what we did here. And that is, we moved out this nice exhibition in order to put this in. This is where we digitize in public here parts of our insect collection. And visitors can look just at the people that would normally be behind the desks. I took this photo this morning when nobody was there. And could encounter with them and ask them questions and chat. And what we've learned from here, I have one last slide. What we learned from here is that this was a brutal experiment. We just moved things in and started doing it because we didn't know how long we will pursue it. The idea, because we didn't know how it would affect our colleagues with their duties. And we didn't know how the visitors would react. So far, it has been very successful and promising. But what we have to do is we have to make it look like a little bit more like an exhibition for our visitors. And this is basically what we are aiming to install the next couple of months. And with that, I end with what are challenges if you want to present the work you do behind the scenes. And first of all, you have to find projects that are suited to be undertaken in the public, because not every project you can do. For example, we can't do any high security DNA research in public. It's just not possible. You need to get, the second challenge is you need to get the motivation of your colleagues to say, yes, I'm willing to do this experiment. And the third one, and not the tiniest one, is you have to be self-reflective during the conceptual process in order to prevent bad compromises at the end, right? And opportunities is just, you can inspire people with just complete new, unexpected ways of presenting them things. Scientists get positive direct feedback. That's also an opportunity. And you can make a lot of things visible that normally take place behind the scenes. And that's my statement so far. Thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you, Uwe, for your statement. And before we take a closer look at it, we would just continue right away with Catherine's statement, who's gonna to answer on the question, should we allow the scientists to speak to visitors? Should we let the scientists do the talking? The stage is yours.
Hello, I'm really delighted to be with you. So for this 5 next minutes, I would like us to ask ourselves this deliberatively provocative question. So should we let them speak? As a preamble, I would like to remind you 2 things that may influence my perspective. First, I was a scientist, neuroscientist. And second, I'm working in La Cité des Sciences et de l'Industrie in Paris, and we are a science museum without collection. So maybe we could have a further discussion with Uwe after. So your first reaction to the question is surely, well, of course, scientists are the most legitimate. They have expertise on their research subject, and their ability to give meaning to process, to results that may seem unclear is very useful. And the second argument, and linked to the title of this session, is maybe that intermediaries like, I don't know, journalists, science explainer, in their willingness to translate, are maybe more likely to distort the content of science, the process of science, and induce misrepresentation. But should we let scientific talk to the audience if they reinforce a sense of exclusion? I recently read two striking studies on the use of jargon. You know, these very technical terms. The first study compared the perception of a statement with or without jargon and showed that jargon lowers the sense of understanding, that is not surprising, but also lower the interest of people and tell people they don't belong to the community. The second study compared self-reported and actual use of clear verbal communication among medical residents. So they have to talk to patients and they made an observation. And when you ask to the medical resident, they say like more than 80% say they use plain language, no jargon. But when you observe them, they are using an average of 2 words of jargon per minute. So, what if scientists use jargon without realizing it? And I really think that jargon is just the tip of the iceberg, representing all the source of misunderstanding between scientists and those who are not part of the community. My second issue is that finally, should scientific talk to the audience if they have expertise on science, but not about the audience? And when I'm talking about knowing the audience, I'm not just talking about knowing what they know about science. I'm really talking about knowing what are their interests, their motivation, knowing what is relevant for them. Should we let scientific speak if they answer questions that nobody asks themselves? So, should we let them talk or not? I think to answer this question, we need to clarify the question and say, to speak for what purpose? So I join you, Uwe, about the why, the goals. That should be the first question. And I will add a second question, is that with what skills? We can easily imagine, for example, that for the purpose of transmitting research results, scientific expertise and skills in popularization, simplification would suffice. But if we design actions that are aimed to facilitate discussion on societal issues linked to science, this presupposes that listening to the concern of the different stakeholders and discussing the underlying values, taking into account the conception. So as Vivien say, I'm working in a center that make training. So of course, yes, it's my perspective, but we really stand for the idea that with this kind of goal that are more about facilitation, public engagement and all that, we really have to think about the skills and the professionalization. And it's the core of my job as a trainer. To conclude with challenges and opportunities, the fourth challenge is, of course, is for everybody, for scientists and the other, and is the idea that we need to make our goals really explicit, and show the format, the postures, the speaker that are consistent with these goals. The second challenge is specifically related to scientists and is linked to the risk of putting them in the position of expertise that is not exactly on their field, where you can use authority argument, or you can even lead to confusion about the role of science in political decision making. It is a quite relevant question right now. I would like to end with opportunity. The first is, of course, that getting scientists to speak is also an opportunity for the audience to establish some personal link that could somewhere help to feel more trust between them. And the last benefit is, of course, to get out of the laboratory, to develop a form of reflexivity. You talk about self-reflection, Uwe, and about this activity by talking with people who are not part of our community. So to conclude, if we refocus the question on the needs, the motivation, and the skills of the different stakeholders, rather than just on their status, we can imagine rich, meaningful, and relevant collaboration. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Catherine. And we switch right away to Michael's statement. I'm guessing you're prepared a presentation which you want to share with us.
Hello, yes, thank you, Vivien, and thanks to Catherine and Uwe for those wonderful provocations and talks about their experiences in connecting real research with the public. I am going to talk about a different dimension of this question, which is the question, should we experiment on our visitors? So should we actually use the visitors themselves as human subjects in experiments? Let me see if I can open up my presentation here. So I would like to present 3 short stories. I call them 3 tales from the crypt about human subjects experimentation in, and these are 3 stories from my previous institution, which is Science Gallery in Dublin. And then I will briefly mention what our vision is in terms of real research in public in BIOTOPIA in Munich. So first of all, the motivation. Why would you actually want to experiment on visitors in a museum or public setting? I think there are 3 key motivations that drove us in developing this. The first one was really to inspire social connections between the public and scientists. And the second one was to expose visitors to science in the making rather than completed or concluded science. So science as process. And the third one was actually to provide a carrot to scientists for getting involved in public programs with the lure of having large quantities of experimental data, which they could then use in publications. So those were really the 3 motivations to developing this program, which was called Lab in the Gallery in Science Gallery in Dublin, and which is by no means the only example of such programs. So there are, for example, live science programs in Science Museum in London. There Experiment was a program developed in North Carolina. So there are many examples of other institutions trying to do this. But let me quickly give you those 3 stories. So tale number 1 from the crypt, Close Encounters. So this was all the way back in 2009, when just before the Mexican swine flu broke out. So a little bit of forewarning of what we are now experiencing with Corona. It was a project called Infectious, Stay Away in the Science Gallery. And as part of that, we invited the visitors into the Science Gallery, and each visitor was given a lanyard which they would hang around their neck. And this had a digital RFID tag on it. So what happened was that the visitors participated in a digital epidemic as they went through the gallery. So you can see on the screen in this picture, you can see the infected visitors are red and the non-infected ones are green. A little bit like now we have with the Corona Warn app, but this was back long before that existed. But the interesting thing was that the researchers who did this experiment then did this experiment later in an Italian children's hospital and actually produced data which was really valuable in understanding infection pathways through a children's hospital, and using exactly the same technique. And they discovered that it turns out that the nurses are the most infectious people in the children's hospital because they have contact with everybody. Leading to a scientific publication in PLOS One. So that's my first tale. My second tale is about romantic interactions. Romantic interactions, there was a project called Love Lab, the Science of Desire. And this was about, this involved a number of public experiments on romantic interactions. One of them involved fitting people with EEG so that their brain waves would be measured, and involving them in a speed dating experience. So we had visitors in speed dating, and the researchers actually discovered that you could predict the outcome of romantic interactions through the activity of their dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. So this led to a major publication in the Journal of Neuroscience from what happened in the gallery. So this was an example where the researchers had the benefit of human subjects, and where there was actually a serious research paper emerging from it. Now, my third tale is about a different experiment, which was on a particular indicator, a gene which was supposed to indicate high-risk behavior. It was supposed to indicate that people had a tendency to take financial risks. And I'll just give you a short clip of that.
Free will is an experiment designed and carried out by Aoife McLysaght and Chris Dold here at Trinity College Dublin. And it's an experiment to look at one of the dopamine receptor genes, DRD4, because a variation in this gene has shown to be linked with risk-taking behavior. So what we're doing here in the gallery is a DNA extraction, which will be combined with a PCR test in Dr. McLysagh's lab to see which version of the DRD4 gene that the visitors to the gallery have. That's going to be combined with a survey to determine whether or not the people taking part consider themselves as risk takers. So for the DNA extraction, we ask visitors to provide some cells. So first of all, they swirl some water around in their mouths. That collects some cheek cells from inside the mouth. Then we add a detergent to those cells, which breaks them open and releases the DNA into solution. And then we use an alcohol to precipitate out that DNA so that we can see it and collect it before sending it off to the lab for the PCR test. So this is one of the first genetic links that has been made to a normal distribution of personality types. We're not looking at anything clinical. And we're trying to see.
So I'll just cut there just in the interest of time. But the interesting thing about this experiment was that it failed. It did not work. These are a couple of the notes from team members at the time. You can just see, I won't read them out, but you can say, you know, free will is not going to work. Free will was the name of this experiment. You know, and some interesting comments from the team. I mean, the reason it didn't work was not that they didn't get enough DNA from these cheek swabs. One would have needed to do more swabbing to get enough DNA to use in the experiment. But I really like this comment of a team member. I think it's important for future reference that we don't overdo or embellish what may be a simple experiment project installation, and that they are to not give the impression that this is the answer of why we have free will, impulsive personalities, etc. We have to keep thinking and improving on better ways to do this. I guess this is what the challenge is for the very thing we are trying to do. Communicate what science is to people, and all of its frustrations should be added to this. So the idea that science is a frustrating process often, and that it's long. So just to conclude, just to mention that these experiences that we did with Lab in the Gallery and Science Gallery are something that we're also learning from for our plans for BIOTOPIA in Munich, where we'll have 4 permanent labs. We'll have an EAT lab looking at future food, a bio lab, a bioart and design studio, and a neuroscience lab, which will be fueled by scientific residencies here in BIOTOPIA. But just to summarize, I suppose I see 3 challenges. I mean, one challenge is that real research is unspectacular. It often is like watching paint dry, and that's a challenge for doing it in public. It's bureaucratic. It requires complex ethical procedures, etc. Also, science is slow. People expect instant results and success, but as you've seen, sometimes it can lead to failure. Also, this kind of public experiment works very well for some scientific fields like experimental psychology, neuroscience, or genetics, but really doesn't work for other areas, high energy physics, for example. Then benefits, humanizing for the scientists, face-to-face interaction, some of what we've been hearing about from Catherine. Also, visitors get to experience science in the making. They get to contribute to science. And finally, the scientists are, in a Machiavellian way, are very happy to have a source of human subjects. It's a win-win to them. Their researchers participate in public engagement, but they get access to data that they wouldn't otherwise have. So with that, I will hand back to Vivien. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Many thanks to all of you and your short statements. And I think we now have some time to discuss your statements. And to the audience, if you have questions, just raise your virtual hand by clicking on it, just like Sonia, my colleague, explained to you, or write your question in the chat and we try to answer them. And however, I'm very sure that due to the different statements, the speakers already want to react on each other. And I see Uwe, he's raising his finger. And Uwe.
Not just buying time for the audience to type their questions in, but Michael and Catherine, super interesting. I would have so many comments. I skipped that. I have a question. Michael, this is, I mean, I haven't been aware of the infectious exhibition, and just the advertisement with "Do not enter." I find that super. I want to adopt it for something later. But my question would be: did actually the visitors, have they been later aware that the data that you? I mean, that doesn't make it any negative thing, because the image implied that the audience at some point was aware that they were part of an experiment and they saw the results in the exhibition. But have they been later aware that the data has been used for actually a very useful scientific paper that actually paid out positively for understanding of spreading of viruses?
Thank you, Uwe. So the when people were participating in the experience, we had because Science Gallery was part of a university, we also had an ethics committee, and people had to, sign consent forms for the data to be used, etc. And so that was at the front end. At the back end, to be honest, in the early days, we were not so good at closing the loop in terms of sending the research papers, because often it would come back, the research would take a year to be published, etc. And I think that was a learning very much for our team, that it was really important to actually feed back the research results to the public. And I think at the beginning, Science Gallery was probably not as good at that as it could have been. And I think that, I think we have people from Science Gallery Melbourne as part of this now. So, I'm sure that it has developed and improved over the years, because I agree with you fully. That kind of closing of that loop is really important in terms of people getting involved in these experiments.
I see Catherine is raising her hand.
Was it just sending the paper, or was it like organizing some special event or something about the restitution of the results?
Yeah, well, I think it was at that time just about sending the paper, but I think you're absolutely right that to have a kind of follow-up event would be a really good thing to do, to discuss the results. This is something which also for BIOTOPIA we are thinking about now, in terms of, because we will have these 4 fixed labs, if you like, but they will have different scientists coming through them. So they will, so this will be much more of a kind of an everyday experience that one can, it won't just be for human subjects experiments, of course. The labs will also be doing experiments on fungi and bacteria and so on. But nonetheless, I really like the idea of, I think anything you can do to kind of bring a group back to deepen the experience is a really valuable thing for museums to do, and for science centers, because you bring people on a new journey. And I think often we're very focused just on that kind of 1.5 hour visit that people have, and then they're gone. So I really like your idea, Catherine, that one could have an event. Is that something that you have done in La Villette at all, or in your work?
I don't think so, but we are trying new kind of project and exhibition that also implies some researchers, but it's work in progress. So I hope we will have that. I will push for that.
Excellent.
Great. I just got the message that we had a participant raising his hand, her hand. Maybe the one can join us on stage. Janavi, welcome.
Hi, Michael John. I think
Janavi.
Lovely to see you again, and lovely to see the rest of you as well. So my quick question is, I mean, as you probably even already anticipated, I'd love to know more about the labs that you're doing at BIOTOPIA. As you're aware, we are also setting up 5 different labs in Science Gallery, Bengaluru. And it's the mechanism, right, like of making these open labs or public labs, as we call them, work. So how do you, how do you, in a sense, anticipate getting serious participation and commitment from the scientists to occupy these labs, which are where the primary purpose is, of course, creating public engagement, but also conducting research at the same time, right? Like, so in a sense, so far, we have been taught to look at these 2 goals as at least in tension, if not in conflict. So it would be just lovely to know how you're thinking about it, because clearly you're about 10 steps ahead of us right now in thinking about them.
Not at all, Janavi. And I should mention, maybe Janavi is the director of Science Gallery Bengaluru in India, which is a very, very exciting institution in development. But just to say, I think I probably, like you, have seen many examples around the world of kind of ghost labs. This is a phenomenon where, there is this idea of having a lab in the science center or in the museum, and then, for some reason, whenever you go to try and see it, it's closed, or there's nobody there, or it has strange operating hours, or you have to call some funny phone number to book something which may happen in a month. And I think that we want to avoid that, and I think we all want to avoid that. And I think we are, for us, the combination of the residency programs with the labs is a very important aspect. So we actually will have apartments in BIOTOPIA where we can have visiting researchers actually, living while they conduct a project. Each lab will have a permanent lab manager, so operating the lab. But then we will have residencies, and we will also have not just scientists in residence, but also artists in residence working with biological materials, and even chefs in residence working with the food lab. I think they can help us to animate the lab. One still has the question of the value proposition to the scientists, where in terms of these kinds of human subjects experiments that I was talking about, there's a very clear value proposition to the scientists of why it makes sense, because scientists can get in a few weeks the number of human subjects. So it would take them maybe years to get through their normal channels. So that is an extremely powerful value proposition for scientists to get involved. It's more difficult if you are, let's say, working with scientists who are not interested in human subjects. I think for them, it's like, why should I bother? I've got my own lab, I've got my own. So for us, I mean, one thing is that we're in our bio lab, we will actually have an S2 lab. So we will have a serious biosafety level 2 space, which obviously the public can't go into that part, but it will be visible to the floor of BIOTOPIA. So things can be exhibited in it, which require biosafety level 2 conditions, but access will be only for the trained scientists. We are trying to engage with groups. I mean, ideally, you want groups who have an interest in also the outreach dimension of it, as well as the research. So one example is, for example, iGEM is this wonderful organization which has a competition every year called the International Genetically Engineered Machines Jamboree. And the teams, Munich keeps winning this contest, are doing very well in it. And so we have very strong community here that we can, and you know, and we're hopeful that these communities will engage with our lab, because they also have the interest in public engagement. But I think it's not a trivial problem that you've raised, because I think you know, we've all seen those ghost labs, and it's a serious risk.
Yeah. So yes, so just one sentence and I'll shut up. So we've thought of having fellowships, you know, not dissimilar to the residencies that you just mentioned. Which would then probably bring in you know, early career scientists, if not mid or senior, or maybe, you know, people who kind of stepped out of very active careers and want to do some. So yes, but that problem remains. But yeah, let's see. Since some of us are experimenting at the same time, probably we'll have some answer at the end of it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Genevieve. I just got the message that Ken Arnold was raising his hand. Maybe he can join us.
There he is.
There he is. Hi, Ken.
Hello. How nice to see you. So yes, I'm Ken, and I'm both from Medical Museum in Copenhagen and from Welcome in London. And thank you so much to the three of you. Really rich, fascinating thoughts. You know, science is a complicated thing, so this isn't surprising, but I just started writing down the different strands of science that you were referring to or mentioning, and I started talking. So there's one, you've just talked about it, which is the sort of looking at what science looks like when it's done. Then there's talking to researchers themselves, either about what they're researching or alternatively about what it's like to do research. Maybe the least appealing, but still an important thing, is presenting what does science look like when it's an output, you know, which is often a paper that very few people can understand in a journal, but that's maybe important. Then there's the, you know, well, what does research translate into? Surely, you know, maybe this is part of Catherine's point. Surely this is what visitors are interested in, is not so much the research itself, but how it leads to a better, healthier, more prosperous world. And then, Michael John, you've been talking about, you know, how do you get visitors to actually be involved in research as participants, you know, as subjects of research. And maybe, you know, I'm sure there might be others in there too, but that's, you know, that's a big, complicated bag of different aspects of science. So I suppose my question to all three of you, or any of you who want to engage with this, is, you know, how important is it to prioritize that, to say, look, really, you know, these are busy people, they haven't got time to swallow all of what science is about. Should we just find the core bit that we're trying to get across? Or, you know, the other part of me thinks, actually, you know, part of the value of dealing with science is to show that it's huge and complicated and that it has many strands, and therefore maybe to share that complicated picture. So I'm puzzled. I've, you know, been doing this for many years, and I just wonder whether you think it is valuable in a space like museums to simplify and to say, look, really, it's about process now, or the world of science, and don't worry if you're trying to work out where process, where product, where translation, where public interest lie. It's important that you absorb the whole thing.
Okay, so Uwe wants to answer.
I guess all of us should have a take, because I think we will answer it from a different perspective, and that might be interesting. And really, I do want to start, if I'm allowed to. Ken, thank you. I think you touched important points and aspects, because not everything we do, even though if we say we are doing the same, we are showing what science looks like, how it works, we don't do the same, because we have different aims and different perspectives on it. And to me, and we have to focus, right? This is important. I want to give you an example. What do you think, how many people that use an airplane understand how it works? And even though if they would not be able to repair an engine of a plane and then later fly without the fear of falling down, how many don't need that knowledge to trust that this is the right way of transportation? And the trust and knowing that this thing works is something else than understanding each complex detail of it, how it actually works. And this is something I focus a little bit on what we are doing in the recent 2, 3, 4 years with opening up sciences. We are focusing on the emotional aspect and the trustworthiness or the acceptance of not even, as a visitor, I don't understand completely what these people are doing, but I understand how they are doing or why they are doing it, and therefore I have trust in it. And I find this a very fruitful thing to do, because the feedback we get is pointing towards a direction that it can be successful with very easy measurements. And the reason why it works is that, and there I come to how important it is that the scientists themselves are the encounters with the visitors. I have to get to another point. We are natural communicators. Even though we think that sometimes we can't do something, we can't explain things, we actually, when accidentally we come into a situation, we can do it without even knowing how to do it. So I can easily explain to Michael a concept of an exhibition because I can use my jargon. I know he understands it. I can be very precise, and I will fail completely with someone from the public if I want to explain the same thing. But if I know it's someone from the public, I will automatically shift and talk about different things. With Michael, I would talk about the strategy behind it. And with the visitor, I would probably talk about the emotion that is in my work and why I find it, why I like the work and why I'm motivated to do it. Or I would explain how it is beneficial to them and how it's important for them to be encouraged or entertained. So, and in our situations, what we found out when we have those direct encounters between visitors and scientists, they never speak about the complex details of the science and the results. What they talk about is the motivation behind it. I do that because I want to get to know this thing. I want to find out how this works. And I set up this, this is my situation and this is my methods. And now I have a failure in my methods and I'm disappointed and I don't know what to do. And this situation, any visitor can relate to. I had that in my life as well. And then there's the joy if something works out and you know, being really inspired to do something that transfers easily. But okay, of course, this does not explain how science works and how the results are getting on the surface, but it builds some trust, and that is something I'm focusing on probably so far.
Okay, Michael, yeah.
Well, maybe Catherine would like to also answer, or? Yeah.
I could answer after you.
Pardon?
I could react after you.
You sure? Okay. So yeah, well, maybe very briefly, I mean, Ken, I think one of the things that you've done very well in Welcome and also in Medical Museum in Copenhagen is really demonstrate powerfully that science is part of culture. And I think that's a really, really important lesson for people, and that science has all of the complexity and all of the human qualities of other aspects of culture. And I think that one of the problems that we have at the moment is that people tend to have this image of science as certainty, as a set of certain facts. And I think that anything we can do to disabuse people of this image, it doesn't mean that you're taking away respect from science. It can be quite the opposite, that you're actually creating respect for a process. But even activities such as the March for Science and so on have often tended to fall back on this rather, you know, Strohmann version of science as this mass of certainties. So I think one of our tasks is to really go away from that. And one way is to show the interaction between science and other areas of culture, like you've done in Welcome and in Medical Museum. Another way is to actually bring the scientists to really bring the scientists as humans into the experience, and for people to understand that actually they get frustrated, they don't know the answers, that they're dealing with the unknown every day. And I think that's one of the benefits of these types of projects that Catherine and Uwe and I have been talking about. And there's no one particular way to do it, and there's no specific dimension of science that one needs to focus on. But I think this humanizing of science and experiencing science as part of culture is quite central.
I'm not sure I'm going to add something more, but I really hear what you're saying. And yeah, we are when we are doing some training for scientists, it's one part of the question is, should I talk about myself or about the results, about the process? And often I have scientists that just want to talk about the results, but not why they are doing that and when does it fail and all that. And it's part of the training also to understand that link to their goal of meeting people, exchanging, and all that. They need to talk about that. And it's important for the feeling of trust. The second thing is about certainty. So in l'École de la médiation, for next year, we are going to organize some professional meeting once a month about critical thinking and what we can do as Science Museum to help people to develop critical thinking and what should be our posture. And we will have a specific meeting about how to talk with people about uncertainty, and I hope we will have collection of best practices, because uncertainty in science is linked to several subjects of uncertainty, and I'm sure it's not the exact way of talking about. And the last part is maybe like, how could we help people to understand how research work, but not in the individual point of view of what is your daily work, but more like how the community works. And I remember in my previous job, we had a science festival where someone had created a game, a society game, where you had all the steps of research, and that was a support to talk about the publication, the money, the different people involved. So my point is really making the goals explicit and then choosing, and I totally agree, Ken, with the fact that we have to give some priority to choose the good tools.
Fantastic. Can I just jump in with one final thought? Because I think you've helped me simplify my complicated picture. I almost think that there's maybe three levels you've described. So one is about how much knowledge do we want to transfer? And then another is maybe how much understanding, and that, understanding in the sense of raising curiosity rather than providing information and ideas. And then the third is almost to do with feelings, so how much do we want people to emotionally and personally engage? And maybe those are the three dials. Some exhibitions, some projects really should be focused on transferring some knowledge, if that's the research that we're dealing with. Others maybe are more about the understanding, the general understanding of where that knowledge comes from and what it means. And the final is, what is this for me? What does this make me feel? And maybe those are the questions we should ask at the beginning of the project. Is this mostly a feeling project, or is this mostly a knowledge project?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ken. We have another participant who wants to join us, which raised his and her hand. Eva, welcome. Maybe you need to unmute yourself. Hi.
I just want to add very shortly that I think what is also important is this dialogue. So the researchers, they are also human beings, and I think they gain a lot when they discuss their research with the visitors. For example, in PhDs, they very often don't see the woods for the trees. So if they really explain it to the general public, it really helps them to explain in a paper what they are doing. So I think this is another very important aspect.
I think that's a great point, and I think one should not underestimate the effect of involvement in these projects on the researchers themselves and on how they, what they learn in terms of how they communicate to different audiences. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so thanks a lot to everyone. Is there any question left for you? Well, I see from Maria Christou. I quote, "I think it's maybe easier for the public and the researchers to discuss the certain scientific fields, physics, etc. But for domains touching human research, biology, medicine, etc., it could be more challenging. And even though it's very important from my point of view for scientists to listen to the public's concerns and anxieties, I think it's also important to have trained scientists on how to respond to these sometimes controversial remarks in order to have a constructive discussion." Catherine.
Yeah, I just want to react about that. Of course, public concern, anxieties, and also knowledge is core of what could happen during this dialogue. And about the training, it's also a question that raised from our community, how to react to some controversial issues. So we also develop part of a training about that and how you are sure to understand what people means when they are asking or saying something, and how you can construct, help them to construct an answer and not just being like in a conflict with two words that don't understand themselves. So yeah, I just agree with your comment.
Thanks, Catherine. We got another question. What do you feel about the role of citizen science projects in museums? Is there a scope to increase public participation in this type of research projects beyond data collection or processing into the conceptualization or analysis parts?
Maybe I'll start on that, and others may have. I mean, I think that museums have a great opportunity to get people involved in citizen science projects without doubt. And I know that Berlin has been doing amazing work in this regard, and also several other museums, including natural history museums. But I suppose the question is really asking that often people have the role of the kind of the dumb observer, or they are kind of carrying out some sort of routine data collection or observation, which is then made synthesized and made available to experts, and the participants don't often have access to the conceptualization of the project. I think citizen science, like the kinds of lab-based work we were talking about in our discussion, it all comes down to the relevance to the participants. And relevance, I know, is a theme that's popped up again and again in these discussions, but people are going to be motivated to participate if they feel it's deeply personally relevant. And for me, the best example of that is like Fukushima in Japan, when after the nuclear disaster in Fukushima, many local residents became very, very diligent observers of radiation levels locally. And so they participated in a large-scale citizen science project, which was triggered by this disaster. I think that in designing all of these projects, we really need to interrogate first about, which audiences are going to find this extremely relevant and interesting to them. Citizen science projects, I think many of the ones I have seen fail to really engage a broad audience in the conceptual level. But I would love to know if people have other examples where they've seen it, a broader participation in the conceptual aspect of the citizen science projects. Maybe Uwe, I don't know if you've experience in Berlin.
I can add something. Catherine also nodded, so I keep it short. Yes and no. To me, we had just a master thesis on expectations towards citizen science as a communication tool, and it revealed that we don't even know, is it a scientific method or is it a communication tool? What are we talking about? Is it pears or apples or both? To me, it doesn't matter that much. We just have to know that we are speaking sometimes about different things. To me, I don't mind if having visitors as subjects of a research project, if that qualifies as citizen science or not, as long as the visitors know that they are participating in something probably meaningful and it does mean something to them, it communicates something and it reaches something, and that's a good thing. And it doesn't matter if it's called citizen science. And do we have here projects for school kids that we call citizen science? And I personally probably doubt if it is citizen science, or is it rather a lecture with some experimental things in there. Doesn't matter if it reaches a certain point and gets you connected a little bit better to what research could mean or actually means. I personally have to say that we are we aim to implement more real citizen science definition problem. I mean, where the participants come from society, are academic experts, and really participate in the projects, not only as collectors or you know, data producers, but also being involved in the in the analysis probably, or in the publication. But that's a lot harder to do than the other things. I think important is to note that when we look into the community or the museum scene, that everyone tries things. And my personal final take on it is that citizen science is not a measurement to reach a gigantic audience, because you can only handle so many visitors to be part of a project, but it's worth for them because it's quality, not quantity.
Mikey, you wanted to say something, or did you just unmute yourself? Yeah.
So I just posted something in the chat. Just one example that came to me was where a scientist called Bo Lotto did research where primary school children were co-authors of it, and they were very much involved in the conceptual aspect. So that's maybe one example of a direction. I mean, whether one would technically call it a citizen science project, I mean, it's not a mass participation project, but it did involve non-scientists in the creation of research publications. So maybe that's an interesting example.
Okay, thanks a lot. Since we are now we are at the end of our slot, obviously, and I would like to close it. And many thanks to all of your speakers and also the participants who joined the discussion.